What I typically like to do is try to go around the room. I'm just waiting for a couple more people to come in. I'm just asking patients, if we have a smaller group, what you're looking to get out of today, so that I can try to address some of those things that you're looking towards. Okay. I do have a set presentation, but I can certainly go over other things if there's enough of an interest. It's hard to discuss your specific case because HIPAA stuff, but I can answer questions as best as I can. Okay. And I usually like to save that towards the end. Are we okay, Sid, with that? Is that okay? So not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot, is there anything that you're looking to do to get out of tonight?
Well, yes. When I saw what was advertised, dealing with fibromyalgia and chronic pain, I've been dealing with some of that recently, and I'm in the process of trying to figure out what it is.
Okay.
So I know that I went to a chiropractor about 35 years ago. It
Right.
changed my life.
Yeah.
And
okay.
if you hit it right, and it was a lecture that I
Right.
went to.
Right.
It totally changed my life. So
Okay.
I'm hoping I get some
Okay, all right, so
information.
it's a good thing that you brought up. I have a lot of testimonials that I typically play before the workshop. You want to see, maybe turn it down too if it's a little hot in here, if we get a little stuffy. But we're getting into functional medicine and integrative medicine. So the chiropractic stuff that I do is a very small component of it. So I do more functional medicine, integrative medicine, functional neurology, and the functional neurology is a component of the chiropractic, but some people I never even consult with in that way. I do with a lot of them, but some people are like, oh, I'm not here for that. I'm here for fibromyalgia, and I know something's going on with my blood test that I'm not being told about. Medication is not working, and I want to look for another approach to try to get better, and so we offer hope in that regards. Okay. So that's good too. I'm sorry, I can't put you on the spot there. Tracy? Terry. Hi, Terry. Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here. Is there anything you're looking to get out of today with our workshop? I mean,
just information.
Okay, so a lot of people here are really, really suffering, and fibromyalgia patients are typically thought of as the most difficult patients to work with from the medical model, because what's going wrong is not easily identifiable on the blood tests. So, yeah, men have it as well. Yeah. There is a predisposition for autoimmunities towards women. And so, like I said to you earlier, you're autoimmune until proven otherwise. So autoimmunity, meaning your own immune system is attacking your own tissues. And you see it more in today's day and age than you've ever seen it. CDC is not even keeping track of autoimmunities anymore. And it's because of environmental toxins. And so I try not to get on my political, soapbox, but, the toxic exposures to the foods and the air and the water that we breathe on a day-to-day basis is not great for our immune system. And then you have your own immune system attacking its own tissues, and then you have inflammation, gastrointestinal disorders, brain fog, neurological disorders, musculoskeletal pain, and now we can't find anything wrong with you in your blood work, so you have fibromyalgia, and I can't help you. Or you're crazy, and we need to give you some antidepressants, because it's not us that can't find the problem, it's got to be you, right? That's kind of the model. I mean, I don't mean to be pessimistic, but I want to offer a lot of hope for you guys, because I think there is a lot you can do naturally to help out, and a lot of you are doing a lot of it, but you're not in the exact sweet spot of where you need to be. So I'll just start from my presentation. I absolutely don't think anyone is crazy. I just think that we haven't found out the main triggers that are causing your immune system to react against your own tissues. And I'll just use an example for today. I did a workshop on gastrointestinal problems last week, and I had a 15-year-old with her father here, and she got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis in March. And so she brought in this much stack of paperwork. Today, I saw her today. And usually I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's the trigger that caused her own immune system to attack itself? So we'll look through white blood cell count, you'll look through platelets, and you'll look through differentials, and you'll look through liver enzymes, and they're running the same test. She's grossly anemic, and they're not really doing too much for that. They just have her on Remicade and infusions and all that stuff. But then it hit me like a ton of weights, where it said Hep A reactive and Hep B reactive. And so I asked her, I said, what did they tell you about this? And unfortunately, her and her father had never been told about it. I mean, that's an elephant in the room. That's dysregulating her immune system. And until you address that, you can take the Remicade and the painkillers and the Lyrica and the Neurontin and all that stuff till the cows come home. But you're not doing anything for that specific stressor or that specific pernicious thing that's causing your body to go against its own tissues. And then you bring in the fact that her mother had a thyroid problem, her aunt had some genetic predispositions for stuff, and we get into methylation. Any of us know in here about methylation and genetic testing? Okay, so it's a big component now. It's a huge component that a lot of doctors don't know about. And so if you go to 23andme.com, 23andme.com is an ancestry site where they will take a saliva sample and they will tell you about your genetic, what we call polymorphisms, which means things and enzymes that aren't coded effectively from your father or from your mother, and if you inherit both genes, it's considered homozygous. And what that means is if you get, say, a hepatitis exposure, I may not develop colitis, but because you have a gene that is specifically coded for not being able to reduce inflammation or not being able to regenerate DNA or not being able to detoxify or not being able to, fight off infections, then you're going to express that genetic component. So there's a lot to that. We touched upon that a little bit, but realize there's a lot of hope that you can do when you have these things, and you just need to look outside the box. That's the unfortunate thing, is nowadays you have to look outside the box.
I was going to say that I know a chiropractor who said that fibromyalgia is something that doctors can almost never treat without medication, but that it's one of the easiest things for chiropractors. Is that true?
Yeah, no, it's not true. The musculoskeletal components, yes. But there's so much inflammation in that person's body that you're not going to do a musculoskeletal approach that's going to fix that.
Okay.
Yes. It's 23andme.com. 23
Yeah,
23andme.com. All right, so I don't think you guys are crazy. A little bit about myself. I'm originally from Toronto. I don't think I sound funny anymore. I used to sound funny when I heard myself speak. Are you from Canada? From Montreal, okay. When I go back and I hear them talking, like, oh my goodness, I hope I don't sound like that. But anyways, I'm from a traditional medical family. So my sister's a primary care practitioner. My mother is actually immunization nurse in the health in the school systems, and my first cousin is a trauma surgeon. And I hurt my back when I graduated college. And they wanted to do surgery for me, and I didn't want to have surgery. And so I had just graduated with an exercise physiology degree, and I rehabbed it myself. And it kind of made me a little mad that I was going to go for surgery under the knife when I could have just rehabbed it myself. And so I saw a chiropractor. He helped me on my journey to decide that's what I wanted to do. So I ended up going to school in California, and then I ended up moving to Florida with my wife. And we were pregnant with twins, and 4 months pregnant, $150,000 worth of student debt, moving to a state that I didn't know anyone, and then I injured my back. And so I was exhausted. I was burnt out. I wasn't licensed yet in Florida because they were just starting to still take their own Florida boards, so I had to wait. And it was really a scary thing, because I didn't think I was going to be able to get out of it. And I had a patient who was an acupuncturist, and they brought this book in. Has anyone ever seen this book before? You have it? Okay, good. So I think it's a great book. I don't think it's the end-all, be-all in it, because there's a lot of other things like methylation we just talked about, and heavy metal toxicities, environmental exposures. But it's a good primer. And so I would put here, you could put here, why do I still have fibromyalgia symptoms when my lab tests are normal? And that's what we base a lot of this presentation on, is why are your lab tests normal even though you still have problems? And we'll get into that. But for me, is why do I have exhaustion and stress and fatigue? And it actually gets into adrenal fatigue in this book. Does anyone ever, who's here today, who has fibromyalgia or is here to learn more information, have ever been told about your adrenal glands and potentially? You're going to put your hand up for everyone. You have Hodge? Addison's, okay. So every one of you here has an adrenal gland problem that no one's told you about. I would put money on it. And it's just because we're here, number one, but number two, you're in a world of stress. We're not just environmental stress, but deadlines and finances and relationships and kids and jobs and all of that stuff. Plus blood sugars. We don't stabilize our blood sugar on a day-to-day basis effectively. We have inflammation in our body, and your adrenal glands settle your inflammation. So if you're not being worked up from an adrenal gland problem, and traditional medicine doesn't think of adrenal gland as a legitimate problem, then you're not being managed properly in my book. Most of you have thyroid problems, even though you don't realize that. And you may say, well, my TSH levels are normal, and that doesn't mean anything. It's a 50-year-old model. And so I'm also a nerd, I will admit that. I do a lot of research. I was just in Chicago this weekend for a methylation research conference, and I spend a lot of time. So I went back to school. This sort of was an epiphany. It's like, oh, that's wrong with me, and that's what I'm going to do for my life to help patients get better beyond just musculoskeletal problems. And so now my practice is filled with fibromyalgia patients, insomnia patients, thyroid patients, adrenal fatigue patients, peripheral neuropathy patients, chronic pain patients, just chronic patients that don't fit the regular model. So this is a great book to just get a good idea as to a primer as to immune problems, blood sugar dysregulation, adrenal gland dysfunction, food sensitivities. This will go over that, and if you address those things by themselves, a lot of fibromyalgia patients will do very well. It's usually the deeper lying things like this young 15-year-old that had Hep A that you need to address beyond just the anemia. So this is a great book. So I went on, and I'm actually going to take a test to become a diplomate in nutrition. I'm there, I just haven't done it. A functional medicine practitioner is a graduate program in functional medicine. Then I went on to a neurology program, a diplomate in the American Association of Integrative Medicine, and now I'm enrolled in the College of Integrative Medicine. So I'd spend a lot of time, because I love this stuff and I want to help people. Nothing makes me feel better to get someone who is chronically ill and they're getting better. I mean, you change people's lives. It kind of makes my hair stand up. It's good. Yeah, so that's what I'm dedicated to now doing. And so now I want to talk to you about fibromyalgia. If this was the only slide that we were able to talk about, it'd probably be the most important slide. And what it means is when you're coming in with fibromyalgia, you're not just coming in with fibromyalgia. I mean, it's just a term. You're coming in with potentially autoimmunities like IBS, Crohn's, or colitis. Many of you have blood sugar dysregulation issues, not enough to be called type 2 diabetes, but enough to be considered insulin resistant. In fact, I'll tell you another thing, because I love to get these little stories that I can share with you. We're going to talk about the difference between lab ranges and functional ranges. We kind of understand that already. So what that means is when you take a lab test and you look at the ranges, and it says, say, for blood sugar 65 to 110, that means that if you're 111 or 64, it's flagged as L or H. But if it's 65 or 110, it's normal. I mean, that doesn't seem right just on its own, right? But let's delve into that a little deeper. Number one, they base it on all the people that took the lab test the year before. And so number one, those people aren't as healthy as they used to be. So if you're not sicker than that average, not as healthy person as they used to be, then you're told you're normal. As an example, I just got a blood test. So this lab from, I think it was Delray, is different than Odessa, which is different than, Texas or whatever. It's always going to be a little different, but its lab ranges for blood glucose was 65 to 134. So what does that mean? The diagnosis of diabetes is 126. So what that's saying is it's normal to be diabetic now. That's what it means. I was like, there's times during the day where I want to pull my hair out, and that was one of those times. That means that if you're 126 to 134, you're still told that you're normal. How is diabetes normal? So number one, realize that when you get tested and your lab tests are normal, it doesn't necessarily mean you're healthy. It means you're just not sicker than that average sick person. And thus, that's the title of why are my lab tests normal when I still have symptoms. And so number two is when those lab tests are normal, they don't have to, it's not medically necessary to run any more tests, right? So insurance is off the hook, number two. Number three, doctors get paid less today from insurance than they did. I graduated in 2001. So I get paid less today with Medicare than I did in 2001. but my rent went up, my overhead went up, everything else went up. So do I have more time to spend with you or less time to spend with you? I have less time, right? So if I have less time to spend with you, I'll ask the rhetorical question, who reads the lab tests? Who do you think reads the lab tests? Even before the lab tech? The computer, right? The computer sets the parameters, and the parameter says, in this ridiculous case, 65 to 134. So you're told you're normal. And so the doctor, as much as I do believe they want to help you, they'll look over your blood tests and there's only an H here, an L there, everything else is normal. It's, well, I don't feel good, I'm tired, I'm in pain. Well, you shouldn't be, I mean, everything else is normal, you know. So that's a little, you know, condescending, but that's kind of what we're at today. And so I say don't shoot the messenger, but if you want quality care from your chronic condition in today's day and age, you got to search outside the box. And that usually means it's not going to be covered with insurance. And I say don't shoot the messenger again for that because, number one, remember, your blood tests were normal. So there's no medical necessity to write the script for other testing to do that. And number two, what is the procedure for the medical model to help that? It's medication. And so medicine does a great job with acute conditions. You know, if we have a car accident, knock on wood, or you have a broken bone or a ruptured spleen or a stroke, medicine does a great job. You don't want to have any of those things anywhere else than in the United States. But if you have fibromyalgia and you're that difficult patient and you have your blood sugar is not stabilized because of your adrenal glands being exhausted, you have gut breakdown, and you have food sensitivities and parasites, and you have heavy metal exposures, and you have mold exposures in your home, and you have a genetic predisposition for expressing a gene, and you have all these toxins, what one pill is going to fix that? None. I mean, it's not going to fix it. So I always have a fun exercise where I tell patients, okay, let's think of 2 things that we can do today that would make us infinitely more healthy if we did it every day, right? And so count to 5. 1, 2, 3. Think of 2 things. 4, 5. Okay, so how many of us here said, I can take more medication? I mean, no, you can't take more medication. So you can't medicate yourself to good health. You just can never, ever medicate yourself to good health. And you'll go home and you'll turn on the TV and people are running through fields and feeling great. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's not going to fix the entire breakdowns that are occurring on this slide here. So if you have one autoimmunity, there's a good likelihood that you have multiple autoimmunities. So I talked to a person on the phone today. She had vitiligo. She had Crohn's disease. So if a person has Addison's, there's more likelihood that they have other autoimmunities, pernicious anemia. And really it comes down to figuring out what's driving the bus. What's dragging down the problem? I'll use the example of medication is kind of like a rat infestation problem in the backyard. You can go out there, set traps, all the rats are gone, perfect. You wake up the next day, there's more rats. You didn't address the garbage that was causing the rats to come back. And so you really got to get to the cause of the problem. And with autoimmune patients / fibromyalgia patients, not all fibromyalgia patients are going to be autoimmune. But majority of them are, and then it becomes an immune-based problem. And so like I said, if they're not addressing your adrenal glands, you're missing the mark. 80% of your immune system is in your gut. So if you're not addressing your gut, you're missing the mark too, right? And so I'll say, hey, you have autoimmunities. Did anyone ever tell you that there's a problem with gluten? No one ever told me that, and I think that's baloney anyways, you know? And it's not. There's a lot of problems with gluten. If you go to Europe and Italy, they don't have the GMOs and the hybridizations, and they even say now with gluten, Roundup with the sprays is causing a lot of those toxic exposures, and our immune system can't handle that, and it starts to react against it and produce antibodies. So now whenever you eat gluten, an antibody is produced like it's a virus or a parasite or some kind of trigger to cause your immune system. That antibody now goes and circulates, and there's a lot of cross-reaction with the thyroid or the joint tissue or connective tissue or brain tissue, and next thing you know, you have Parkinson's. So I mean, it's not only, we don't just put a magic wand and say, okay, get off of gluten, you're fixed, but it's a huge, huge help for those that have a problem. So, did you have a question?
Is the gluten issue similar to the celiac?
Yeah, so I say all celiacs are gluten sensitive, but not all all gluten sensitives are celiacs. So what happens is a big distinction. A lot of people will have the baby thrown out with the bathwater, and they won't have any, they won't have celiac, so they won't have the triad, they won't have erosive destruction of their lining, of the villus lining, because it hasn't developed far enough, or it's just not the target tissue. The target tissue could be the joints, or it could be the thyroid, or the brain. So I say all gluten reactives are all celiacs are gluten reactive, but not all gluten reactives are celiacs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I apologize for being late. This is very important. It took me 45 minutes to get here from Federal Highway and 18.
You know what? We're in season now, right? It's crazy.
No, it wasn't raining here. I was, but I'm suffering. No, from fibromyalgia. I mean, I was perfectly healthy until I had an accident. But my aunt, God bless her, she's 85. She was diagnosed with celiac.
Right.
And so now, I mean, we're Italian, so
right. Yeah.
It's like, cut me.
Yeah, it's hard.
Tell me now.
Right.
But I
Yeah.
don't know whether that's something that, hereditary or anything.
There's a genetic component. One of the main.
It's kind of so distant.
It's a genetic component. As soon as someone has an autoimmunity, I want to know about the family, and I don't even kind of care about the family. Let's do a genetic test.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I just had a question. I haven't had any gluten in my diet for over a year now.
Yeah.
And I felt better for a couple months, and then I just started feeling worse again.
Yeah.
So, and I still don't eat gluten. I stay away from, dairy, soy, corn. I stay away from all that stuff, and I just still don't feel better.
Right.
I feel a lot better than,
You did,
being better.
but it hasn't fixed the whole problem.
Right.
Okay, so two things. Number one, could be cross-reactive. So you did say you got rid of some of the other grains, but there's a lot of cross-reactive grains. So when you have intestinal permeability and breakdown, think of intestinal permeability. I use the example like a fine metal strainer, and you drain the pasta and the water drains out and the pasta stays in there. And with intestinal permeability, it's like little rips in this coil. And so not only does the pasta water drain through, the pasta drains through too. And so it drains through undigested, and so then your immune system attacks it and creates a tag or an antibody so that whenever that exposure comes back into your body, so people will say gluten and they get off of gluten, and then you go to the gluten-free section and you have at it, and I'll have gluten-free pasta. In fact, I had a cross-reactive test for sorghum. Sorghum is what they use for gluten-free beer.
Yeah.
And Canadians like to drink beer, so I can't drink it. It's true, right? Or not anymore. I can't do it anymore. So I don't do it at all. But the point is that I don't even test gluten sensitivity anymore, because I just tell you get off of it. If you want to, you can. I kind of use this funny analogy, like it's like your spouse is cheating on you, and you want to hire a detective to take pictures. That's taking a gluten test. But if you want to just trust that they're doing it, then don't spend the money. You know what's happening. But what's really important is to, it's kind of a weird example, but I use analogies. So, but here's what I do say is the food sensitivities like dairy, egg, soy, rice, corn, potato, sorghum, hemp, millet, quinoa, amaranth, spelt. All of the tapioca is a big one. All of the ones that they use in the gluten-free products could be creating cross-reactivity. And here you are doing all the great work that you're doing, the diligence that you're doing, and you're still reacting to them. That's why I'll say if you have a great diet, it doesn't necessarily mean an inflammatory-free diet. So that's a good, important lesson. But going on, so a lot of these things are going on in your body, and you don't just have fibromyalgia, you have a lot of these problems. And then you look at the metabolic side of things, and you're anemic, or your thyroid's not working, or your blood sugar is unstable. And usually it's unstable, it's too low. Like if you had your glucose levels here, and you looked and you saw it was, my glucose is 77, the low end is 65. That's too low from a healthy range. 85 is the low end on the healthy range. And I see that more often than not where it's actually too low. And that's a person who may miss a breakfast, had a breakfast, but then, oh my goodness, it's 1 o'clock, I haven't eaten since 6, or, I had coffee and a muffin, and I didn't have, a nice protein, carbohydrate, and fat. your adrenal glands are being drained from your toxic stress that you're putting on it from not having any calories. And then that drains the adrenal glands along with the food sensitivities, the autoimmunities, the stress. And so those adrenal glands, like I said, they're bankrupt. That's what they are. And a lot of medical doctors don't believe in it. So then we have a lot of hidden infections. That's a huge one. Food sensitivities, low oxygen, chronic inflammation. I'm amazed, I just the functional medicine guy that looks at blood work, and it took me all this time to look through it to see Hep A. And I said, did your doctor say anything to you? No, they never said that. I mean, sometimes all the information is right there. I get people that have autoimmunities, antibodies, thyroid antibodies. They shouldn't be above 34. It's 0 to 34 for TPO antibodies. And they're at 1,800. And I'm like, did anyone ever mention this to you? Yeah, but it wasn't a big deal. Or, like sometimes you'll see, like, how I mentioned the blood tests are read by the labs, the actual computers? Sometimes not only are the lab ranges too broad, but sometimes what happens is they are flagged, and then I'll ask them, well, what did your doctor say to you? Well, it didn't seem like it was too big of a problem. It's not a big deal. I mean, it is a big deal. And there's something there's smoke, there's something going on in your body that needs to be addressed, and it's going to lead to fibromyalgia. It's going to lead to chronic inflammation in your body. So.
With high iron levels in B12 off the chart,
Yeah,
high,
yeah. It's a methylation problem.
At 2 o'clock in the afternoon?
Okay, so it's sort of an aside, but that's fine. I see it a lot. Well, it's two different things going on. So you would think B12 is a lot of energy. You're not absorbing B12 into the cells. Okay. So when you take and a lot of patients have this, you look at their red blood cells and they're off the charts. And either they're taking, it's a B12 deficiency, but yet you're high in B12. So how could that be? It's a RBC B12. It's not indicative of what's in the actual cell. So that's a methylation problem, that's a genetic problem, that could be liver, it's a whole lot of absorption problems. Okay. And then usually, just as a tidbit, it's called cobalamin. That's the form of cobalamin for the mitochondria, and you don't look at methyl or hydroxy, you look at adenocobalamin, just so FYI. All right. Yeah, that's the way to go. All right, so, and then neurological imbalances is sort of the wild card that no one is addressing that really is going to drive your fibromyalgia, specifically for fibromyalgia, and we'll get into that. So I kind of say, you're not crazy, it's not in your head, it's in your head. But we'll kind of explain what I mean by that. All right, so what do I mean by metabolism? I always draw this out on my board for patients. You eat food and it gets converted to energy. That's the best way to describe metabolism. It's very easy to understand. We don't have energy. We wake up with very little energy. We have a little bit of energy, then we crash with the little stress that we hear or we feel. You crash at 2 o'clock. We have difficulty losing weight, focusing, concentrating, feeling cold, not being productive, not remembering as well. All of your cells need to produce energy, need to have a metabolic function. And when we're not doing that and we're here today, you have a metabolic issue. And the metabolic issues could be all those things I mentioned, metabolic imbalances, anemias, thyroid dysfunction, unstable blood sugar, adrenal gland dysfunction. I would just tell you, how would you know if you had any of those metabolic imbalances? Testing, right? You would test. A lot of it is off of CBC testing, just regular testing. A lot of it is, so number one, you would look through the healthy ranges. And that wasn't me who figured out the healthy ranges. I didn't just come up with a range that seems cool. I guess it was the Endocrine Society that came up with a healthy range. And I think it stems from insurances. When you rate someone and you get them qualified for A++ insurance, then they look at what's a healthy range. You know what the healthy ranges are? So that's the healthy ranges. But obviously, if you have any of those things, you are falling outside of those healthy ranges. And a lot of the times, I'll look at a patient and I'll look at their blood work and I'll say, okay, you're trending towards anemia. And they say, well, my doctor's never told me I have anemia. I said, well, your doctor hasn't looked at it from a functional point of view, and you're getting like a C+ on a test, you're not failing the grade, and you're tired, and you don't have energy, and you're not absorbing. And she was kind of mad at me. But I was like, it is what it is. You know, you have an anemic problem, and you're not looking at it from a functional medicine point of view. And functional medicine meaning biochemistry point of view, how you're producing it. And we all learn it in school. It's just that when we graduate, there's an algorithm of care to do this or do this or do this or don't do that. You know, it's unfortunate. But this is how I relate it to the metabolic is metabolically, when we convert food into energy, and then that energy has to go to different cells in our body or different systems in the body, which system do you think gobbles up 30% of our energy demands? Any guesses? Digestive is a good one, but the answer is actually, and the digestive does take a lot of it, but it's our nervous system, our brain. And in fact, our brain helps with the digestive system. So I'll get a patient who has digestive issues, and we'll do vagal nerve stimulation. So it's cranial nerve 10, which helps with diaphragmatic and digestive processes. So there's that connection between the mind and the brain. And when I do my gut workshops, the father of medicine, Hippocrates, says look to the gut, and there you'll find the almost the origin of all human illness. So the gut's definitely a big one, but the brain controls the gut, and the gut helps control the brain too. But it's the brain. And so the brain is the part of the body that requires the most energy. So if we have a metabolic issue and we're not converting food into energy, then that's going to impact the brain. And because we're here with fibromyalgia and we have chronic pain and potentially migraine headaches and focusing and stuff like that, you'll find that you've lost the ability of the brain to put the brake pads on the gas pedal. And that's why a lot of the medications are sympathetic inhibitors for fibromyalgia. And so that's why I'll tell patients when I work with a fibromyalgia patient or a chronic fatigue patient or a thyroid patient, I'm trying to determine how much of your presentation is neurologic and how much is it metabolic. So with that young girl, what I was working with today, I did an examination with her, and her balance was awesome. She could feel her toes. Her eye movements were great. Her coordination was great. Her inflammation and her metabolic issues haven't gone on long enough to impact the well of the brain supply to cause it to run dry. But when your inflammation goes on long enough and you're not able to produce energy, then ultimately it's going to impact the brain such that you're not feeling happy, you're anxious, you can't focus, you can't concentrate, you have chronic pain, you sensitive to light, raciness of the heart, a lot of those things, right? Am I saying things that are all the things that we may be feeling? I mean, that's what's going on. So your nervous system basically is your brain and the nerves. It's your central your command station. It communicates to all the nerves. In fact, it actually houses where the hypothalamus and the pituitary live to signal when the hormones should be released too. So that's a big one too. So that's why I say you're not just here with fibromyalgia. You're here with thyroid-based disorders, hormonal-based disorders, inflammation-based disorders. You're here anemic-based disorders, blood sugar-based disorders. So your brain is one big sensor. I kind of joke around and I say, if I touched you here, where do you feel that?
There.
You would say there. And the nerdy answer that I would say would be like in the left parietal lobe. So the opposite side of the brain is responsible for the other side of the body. And but it's one big sensory receptor. So it takes in information from the environment, assimilates it, and makes decisions about that. But at the end of the day, it's one big sensory organ. And it gets all these information from smell, sound, so all these receptors. The biggest two that light up the brain the most are touch and gravity. That's why when astronauts go into outer space, if they don't do exercises, they have atrophy of the brain because there's not that constant stimulation on there. So the brain is always getting information, and it's always inhibiting pain. In fact, if we lost the ability to give information to the brain, then you're going to feel chronic pain. And guess what fibromyalgia patients feel? Chronic pain. So you're losing your ability to inhibit or put the brakes on the sympathetic system of the body. And that's where this program or when we do functional medicine really shines, is because we teach patients, just like you're doing bicep curls for your arms to get them to develop, you're doing brain exercises to get your brain to develop. And that's Neurology 101. So there's 3 parts of the brain I just go over very quickly. There is the cerebellum, that's responsible for balance and coordination. So I'll have patients close their eyes and try to stand still, and you know, they'll fall over. And then, or they'll be good, and then I'll have them to put their foot behind the other foot, and then they'll fall over. And that's a cerebellar problem. And so that's a problem we can help identify. Or I'll have them go and try to put their finger on their nose, and they're missing their nose, or they're kind of here. That's a cerebellar problem. That's a problem with the feedback loops, and you're not able to inhibit. That's like just a problem with the brake pad. You're not putting the brakes on. So those are little signs that you can tell. And those are really good because we've heard of plasticity. Plasticity means if you do something repetitively, eventually you're going to start laying down those inroads, and you can start stimulating that cerebellum. I have really bad cerebellum. I had tubes put in and out of my ears when I was a kid like 5 or 6 times. And so I go for a car ride, and you know, I'm dizzy. My kids want me to go in the cups, you know, at Disneyland, because I think it's so fun to go in the cups. But I just get motion sickness. So that's a good sign. If you go in a boat or a car ride and you get motion sickness, your cerebellum's probably not doing a great job. So that's a big part of it. Kids with ADD, ADHD, they have bad cerebellar development, and it influences their frontal lobe. And what happens is they go and see a psychologist, and they try to work through their issues, and they're on the penthouse when the ground floor is their cerebellar activity. So it's unfortunate, but we help a lot of people from a neurological standpoint with that type of problem. Then there's the cerebrum, or the brain, the actual part of the brain. And then you have the brain stem. And that's what I was telling you. The brain stem houses a lot of the visceral responses, or the parasympathetic responses to slow down the sympathetic area. And so how does the brain work? Sensory input from the body goes to the same side of the cerebellum first. And then it is sent to the opposite side of the brain, and then it goes down to the brain stem. And the brain stem puts the brakes on it and inhibits your sympathetic system. So that should work fine, and that should work well. And if it's working, it's inhibiting, we're not feeling pain, we're not racy, we're doing okay. And it just sort of looks like that, and it comes back down. So you have an overfiring sympathetic system. What is the result? Chronic pain and chronic fatigue, irritable bowel syndrome, urinary tract infections, fibromyalgia, migraine headaches, poor posture, sort of like we see patients walking around like at a grocery store and over here at Western Beef, and I'll see the older people walking around like this, and I know they have a bad brain. I was like, yeah, you need to come to my workshop, and I can help you out. Those are easy things and adrenal gland stimulation. Overfiring of sympathetic nervous system can cause blurred vision, increased sweating, difficulty falling asleep. How many people with fibromyalgia can't fall asleep? That's maybe perhaps one of the reasons. A lot of the reasons, right? I mean, we can come up with a lot of different reasons for that. More often than not, it's your adrenal glands and your circadian rhythms are off, so your clock is not set properly. That's another. Dizziness and vertigo, heart palpitation, cold hands and feet. You guys relate to a lot of these things too? Okay. The cerebellum fatigue, loss of balance, vertigo, chronic neck pain, headache, clumsiness, disorganized thinking, lack of output in the upper brain. Then we have that's the loop, frontal, parietal lobe, temporal lobe. So basically what we can do is we can do a neurological exam and determine what parts of your brain is not firing properly. So where the broken connection is in the telephone. And so it's basic neurological testing. So like when I do smells, I'll have a person smell something, and if they can identify the smell, that's a temporal lobe function. And if they don't smell well, I'll compare it to both sides, and I can tell it's just it's neurologically 101. We know the pathway of how that message gets signaled and how it gets to the area, and then you make that connection, and you know where the loops are broken. So if a lot of the times I'll touch people, my neuropathy patients, I'll touch them on here, and I'll say, okay, how many fingers between my fingers that I'm touching? And they'll say 1. And I say, how about now? They'll say no, none. How about now? They'll say none. How about now? 1. So when that's happening, I know it's a parietal lobe problem. That's responsible for, so sensory patients, people that have chronic pain, it could be a parietal lobe problem. That's where all your somatosensory input is going. And why would there be a parietal lobe problem? Fuel. You're not getting enough fuel to the area. Why not? It could be a lot of things. Inflammation, infections, heavy metal exposures, all of that stuff. And I hate to be pessimistic, but that's kind of what's doing it. So it basically results in inhibition of the sympathetic nervous system. We kind of understand that loop already. Upper brain fatigue can cause anxiety, difficulty scanning pages. So what we do, actually I have another book, it's by the same author, it's up there, and it's the brain book, and it's explaining everything that I'm talking to you about that. It has awesome questionnaires in there, so those questionnaires are part of my intake information. And so it kind of stinks because you have about 25 pages to fill out, but when you fill out a questionnaire in a certain section, and I see 1s, 2s, and 3s, and there should only be 0s, then I know in this parietal lobe problem area, there's a parietal lobe problem. So when I do a test, I kind of already know what I'm going to expect when you fill out those questionnaires, that there's going to be a parietal lobe problem. And what medication is going to fix that? It's just not, right? It's not going to fix that feedback loop. There is medication that will help put the brakes on the sympathetic system, but it's not, it's kind of like, enhancements. It's not actually fixing the problem. It's just sort of, it's just kind of addressing the problem in the area, but it's not fixing it. Altered sensation, numbness, tingling, changes in handwriting, mood changes, lack of motivation, learning disabilities, all of those things can be caused with upper brain fatigue. So this is sort of, the mesencephalon is a fancy way of saying that brain stem. The brain stem sends messages to the spinal cord. This is like, I kind of use an example of if you get held up at gunpoint, you have that instantaneous hyperventilation. So it's a neurological loop where basically your brain sends a neurological message to the adrenal medulla, and that causes the release of those catecholamines and adrenaline and so forth. And then you have these, your nociceptor fibers are stimulated, and that causes a chronic pain. And so that's one of the ways that we can see a loss of sleep and fatigue due to loss of sleep and pain. Overfiring mesencephalon is the highest at 3 a.m., so insomnia, and it's the lowest at 3 p.m., so fatigue. So that's an area we need to try to slow down. There's also emotional stress. So the emotional stress is not a quick, immediate neurological loop that gets sent. It's more in the bloodstream. So it gets released through ACTH. So someone who may have Addison's, adrenal medulla releases cortisol. Cortisol in excess amount is toxic to the brain. So people that are heavily stressed have crappy memories, right? You can't remember a lot of the things. And then they have problems focusing. So I hope by now you kind of realize there's a brain connection too. And it's not just, you're not crazy, but it's not being addressed in the brain properly. Overfiring mesencephalon, so that's again the brain stem, it's not slowing it down, causes dilation of blood vessels, and those are what causes migraines too. And migraine medication is actually geared at slowing down that mesencephalon. But who wants to live on medication for the rest of their life? It's not good for the liver and the kidneys. So how does all this happen? How does all these things happen? And everything I just mentioned, from chemical environmental stressors, emotional stressors, physical stressors, causes fewer nerve impulses. And so these are some of the stressors that we see: anemia, blood sugar dysregulation, food sensitivities, immune imbalance, poor diet. We get into that a lot with omega-6s and omega-3s and processed foods and hydrogenated oils. I don't want you to be neurotic, but I think I always mention in my workshops, little hinges swing big doors. So if you can make small changes to your diet, and you could try to get off of processed food, you can try to get off of genetically engineered food or modified food, or you can go with organic dairy or organic beef. Those are big changes. It costs a little bit of money, but it's our health. I always joke around, like sometimes I'll present a care plan to someone and I'll say your insurance only covers this much, and then they need to think about it because it's an investment. But I joke around, if this was their car, they needed to get to work every day, they wouldn't think about it. They would do it. They need to get to work. Or I joke around, even if I was a plumber and you had poo on your floor and you needed to fix that septic tank, you're not going to think about it. You're going to get it fixed, right? But when it comes to us, we don't always think about that in the same way. And we feel that our insurance should pay for it. And I think your insurance should pay for it. But insurance is kind of like car insurance. You get in a car accident, your car insurance will pay for it. but you have a transmission problem or fuel is low or empty oil, whatever, insurance doesn't pay for that. And it's unfortunate. Insurance pays for BS stuff, but when you want to really get better and healthy, it doesn't pay for it. And a lot of the things is what I said. Insurance pays for what pharmaceutical industry wants them to pay for. That's what it comes down to. Is that right? I mean, it seems right, you know. Anyways, I digress there. So prescription medications can do it also. Chronic inflammation, hidden infections, these are all metabolic problems that create a neurological problem. So there's a metabolic neurological relationship. Emotional stress, adrenal glands. You had your adrenal glands tested? Yeah? And did they do anything about it? Did they? Gotcha. Okay. Did they ever go deeper and look into what may be causing the immune-based stressor? That's the real what you look for.
They think I have a
Oh.
polybody because I have the Hashimoto's thyroid also.
Yeah. So again, there's what's.
They also go together.
Yeah. And again, it's what's driving the bus. What's causing that problem? Multiple chemical sensitivities, mercury amalgams. A lot of waterborne illnesses, molds in the house. Those are things that you look at. So we do homeopathic preparations where we try to identify what the stressors are and try to help the immune system remove those stressors. But that's what you need to do is you need to be sort of like, what was House, the doctor, where he looks at, that's what you need to do nowadays. Okay, so chronic conditions do not get it by themselves. In the Journal of Neuroscience reports in McGill University, the longer the individual has fibromyalgia, the greater the gray matter loss, with each year of fibromyalgia being equivalent to 9.5 times the loss in normal aging. In addition, it is estimated that 30 to 60% of patients diagnosed with fibromyalgia become disabled to the degree that they cannot remain gainfully employed, and that is the myriad of medication, and that is with the myriad of medications prescribed. So it's a bad outcome. And why do you think it's a bad outcome? I mean, everything we're saying, all the things that go wrong with food sensitive, all the things you can kind of recite over and over again, but those are all the things that are not getting addressed. So that's kind of how our therapy is a little bit different. I mentioned neuroplasticity. You have the ability to make changes in your brain. It's not the sky is falling. There's a lot of things you can do. Of all the finds, the one that rewriting the textbook is drawing realization that a brain older than 3 years old is not the rigid structure that scientists long thought, but it's malleable, plastic organ. But a flood of discoveries show that the brain continually reorganizes itself, called neuroplasticity. So at the end of the day, you can do things to reestablish those loops, especially with people that have strokes. You see when they start rehabbing and parts of their areas have died, and the brain sets up these tributaries and all these other ways to compensate. New connections, exactly. So key points on neuroplasticity: your brain changes when stimulated. Different types of stimulation help different areas of your brain. We use oxygen. We do a lot of oxygen therapy, and we do oxygen with exercise. And in fact, you can go and get your own oxygen concentrator and do oxygen with exercise, and that's great for my fibromyalgia patients. We do other brain exercises. We use iPad exercises. Those dots there are kind of fun, but we do some exercises with those dots to an electroactive metronome to get patients firing their frontal lobes. So there's a lot of things you can do. There's oxygen concentrators, therapies for the brain, visual therapies. I'll still do some neurological work with them. Warm water cholerics, those are really good for patients that have cerebellar problems. You put water in the ear. Auricular therapy, olfactory therapy. All of these therapies are all straight out of Neurology 101. Color lenses, still going into them. So there's a lot of things you can do for that. And then you address the metabolic issues. You find out, first of all, put your blood work on a functional scale, because you can't believe how many times a person will say, I never knew I had that. And that's because you're getting a C+ on the test and no one cared to give you extra help. That's kind of what it is. How do you know if you have all of these things? You do testing. And does insurance typically pay for these testing? No, they typically don't. Sometimes I'll have a doctor who will write some of the tests that I want to see, but more often than not, they don't. So these are where I told you about the lab ranges. We kind of get into that. I should put that at the beginning because I always start with that. But those lab ranges are the healthy ranges and the functional ranges. And there's typically shades of gray. And these are some examples. I actually got to change that one now, 65 to 134. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Thyroid is a big one too, 0.3 to 5.7. That's a huge range. It should be 1.8 to 3.0. And in fact, you shouldn't even just base your thyroid function on thyroid TSH alone. It should be all based on antibody testing. And when you do antibody testing, you can get those antibodies down. I have patients that had 1,800 antibodies. It should be 34. She's down to 200 now. I mean, that's how you tell if a person's getting better, is their antibodies are coming down. Cholesterol is a big one. I could do like a 5-hour seminar on cholesterol. The thing is, in cholesterol, it's thought of as the boogeyman, and it's the evil to all things. The cholesterol is necessary in your body for nerve function, for brain function, for hormone production, and here we are mandating that everyone get on cholesterol-lowering medication. In 1989, they had a 25-year project that we were going to fix all heart disease and cardiovascular problems. 25 years later, do you think it's better or worse than it's ever been?
Worse.
It's worse than it's ever been. And the reason it's worse is because we're inflamed. So cholesterol will never deposit on the arteries by themselves. The only way they deposit on the arteries is if we're inflamed. And why are we inflamed? Everything we just talked about. But mostly blood sugar, hydrogenated oils, omega-6 to omega-3s. You go to Italy and you see these people, they have high cholesterol levels, but they don't have the incidence of heart problems that we have. In fact, I think that the natural range, the normal ranges for cholesterol 25 years ago was 320. Now it's down to 220. And now it's even less than that. And actually, the doctors want the lower the cholesterol, the better. Usually when I see lower than 150, I'm concerned that there's not enough cholesterol to make hormones and for brain function and nerve function. So, I mean, that's a big one. That really makes me mad too. So metabolic treatment, there's one major reason we're getting chronic patients better. We simply run the necessary tests and do the proper therapies. It's vastly different from your PPO model. That patient, she was a 75-year-old patient who had over 1,800 antibodies, and she was going for thyroid medication. And I asked her, why did you keep going to this guy if they weren't getting you better? And what was her answer? Is in my insurance plan. And it stinks, but if I give you a free dinner card and it's gonna make you sick for 10 years, would you still go to that too? Sometimes it's terrible, but that's why. So these are some of the testing that we do: complete thyroid testing, salivary testing. I don't do stool samples as much because I just assume guilty until proven otherwise and come up with the protocol that we would do to fix the gut. Food sensitivities, if you ever seen Cyrex labs, just Google that or put an asterisk beside that. That's one of the best labs. It's not one of the best labs, it is the best lab in the world for antibody testing, which means you're testing your immune system to see if it's antibody to a certain food. And I tell patients every day that they're eating these foods and that's causing a reaction in their body, causing inflammation, and we know what happens when we have inflammation. How many of these tests have you had? I mean, it's really putting all of the sides of the puzzle together and trying to help with all of the problems. And then really sticking to it. That's the great thing is once you learn how to do these things, you sort of know that you react to these foods all the time. You know how to do these exercises. You know how to manage your own care. And it's really not like a short-term fix. It's really just educating you to know what to do to fix yourself. So what's next? What I do is I have an offer for 2 visits. The first visit I do that complete neurological evaluation, so the ones that I was telling you with the brain exercises to determine if it's the parietal lobe or frontal lobe or temporal lobe or cerebellum. You review, bring in all your existing lab work. And when I say that, I say let's not go too crazy. I mean, sometimes I do get stacks and stacks of paperwork, and I'll go through them, and I'll see things on there that may not have been addressed, or I'll just see things that everyone keeps doing the same thing. They're not doing anything different. But then I put them on a functional range, and then we sort of sift through the dirt, and we find some things that stick and find out what the actual issues are. You fill out the paperwork, and the paperwork is getting into the questionnaires, and it gets into a lot of environmental histories. As a kid, did you have toxic exposures? So that when we sit down and go over our history, we talk about things people never asked you about. Like, tell me about your silver fillings and when did you get them taken out? Tell me about, and tell me about your home, or tell me about your mother that had this, that, or the other. I've tested patients that have had mercury testing and they're positive and they don't have mercury in their teeth. And how could that be? Well, it could be from vaccinations. It could be from fish now that we eat has a lot of mercury in it. Or even scary, it could be from the mother who was in gestation, crossed the placental barrier. And I mean, again, that will really disrupt your body. And then we do, I usually suggest to be with a spouse because when we do a neurological exam on someone and this person is poking their eye out when they're trying to touch their nose and they just think that they have fibromyalgia, it's more than fibromyalgia. There's other things that are going wrong and the spouse sees that and it drives it home. And then on day 2, I go over what we found with the blood work. So I put it on a functional scale and say, okay, remember when we talked about your blood work? Here's what we found. Here's some of the suggestions that weren't done because they just didn't do it. Here's some suggestions that you should do for other testing. I go over what I found with the neurological findings. I go over what I would recommend in terms of my treatment plans. If you have any insurance, leave that. I'll tell you how much that will cover the therapies that we do in our office. And then definitely want a spouse on that day, because here's what I don't want to happen. Here's what we found. Here's what your blood test showed you. Here's what we need to do. Here's how much it costs minus your insurance. And then they say I have to go home and talk to my spouse about it. Because, I want you to tell me then and there, no, it's fine, it's not for you. Or yes, I want to start, and you don't have to do everything. You can just start with a blood test that tells you if you're reacting to foods. Or you can just start with a 6-week detox that starts to try to clean up the gut. Or you can try to do a 3-month protocol where we're actually working on you and there's really no reason why we can't start somewhere, especially if it makes sense to you. I do only accept 5 fibromyalgia patients per month. Like I said, I do workshops every week. I see IBS patients and thyroid patients and peripheral neuropathy. And here's the thing, a lot of them have the same problems, right? I mean, it's just kind of a different domino in a different order. I usually charge $149 for those 2 visits. It's not each, $149 for 2, because you've done a lot of my explaining. I don't have to worry about explaining it to you in my office. You're here today and you're listening to it. And so what I do is I charge $75 for those 2 visits, not for 1 visit, for 2 visits. $75, and I include either this book here or the book, the Brain Book. I would personally suggest the Brain Book. It's a little more informative. But I read that book on a Kindle. I love Kindle. Yeah, like I'm a Kindle addict. Like the quick pick or the quick buy. I have about 25 books in my queue. But that one book, I didn't realize it was so thick. Like when you see how thick it is, like when is this book going to be over? It's so long. Yeah, and then they have all the citations and the references. But that's a great book. And if I don't think I can help you, I'll tell you, and I'll give you $75 back. So it's a great offer. It gives you, in the very least, some information as to what your next step will be. What we do is you just sign up with Sydney after this presentation, and she reserves your spot. And then that reserves 2 spots for you to come in and work with you. But I do have a couple rules, and the rules are my office is not an emergency room, so I don't just take everyone. No, really, it's not. And so you got to make some changes. Sometimes you're eating very healthy and it's already you're already there. Or other times you're Italian and you don't realize that gluten that you're eating every day is really ripping your gut up inside, and it's not going to be that magic wand fix you by just hoping that you feel better. So there are some changes to make. You do have to take accountability for your health. It's not your insurance's responsibility for your health. It just isn't. I mean, you got potentially an education, you got a house, a car, and insurance didn't pay you for that. And so insurance pays a small portion of what we do. I tell patients it could be somewhere between $200 to $400 per month if you go with the plan that I do for 3 months or 6 months, and you do all the testing, and that's financed. There's other options. And so I don't know to tell you. Patients always ask me for a ballpark. That's the ballpark. So I tell patients, if it's not worth 200 to 400 for a month for you to try to get better, then you're not sick enough. And that's fine. That's great, actually. But I try to have Sydney and David answer the phone and try to tell the patients, if you're an 8 out of 10, where are you on a 0 is you're not really willing to do too much to change, or a 10 is you're willing to do everything to change because it's ruining your life, you're not working, you're having relationship problems, you're not going out, you're not productive, you're not liking yourself, then we only want 8s, at least 8s. Because I don't want to care more, I say a joke, I don't want to care more about you than you care about you. And I have that sometimes in my office where, the husband is like this and they're looking at me and I don't believe anything you say and this is this and this is that and this is this and this is that. And the poor wife is sitting there and she's suffering and my spidey senses tell me this is not a good mix. This is not going to be a good patient. So I'll just, yeah.
Okay, so if somebody commits to this, how often do they need to come?
It depends. Okay, so I always get questions one shape or form or another after this. So I'll go back. So let me explain the mechanics of it. You leave here, you book your appointment for $75 to reserve your time. You take my paperwork home with you. You collect your blood work, you fill that paperwork out and have it done before you get here, because if you don't have it done when you get here, I'm not going to see you. I'm just too busy for that. I go over your history, we go over together, tell me a little bit more about this, tell me a little bit about that, tell me about this, tell me about that. All right, let's go over my neurological exam and see what's going on there. Any more questions? I'll give you a tour of exactly what we do. That's about 45 minutes to an hour. When you leave, then I have my homework assignment to review all your blood work, put it on a functional scale. So even in that first visit, I kind of don't even look at your blood work. I do maybe peek a little bit and say I expect to see this or expect to see that. Then you come back and say, okay, here's, Roxana, what I found from what you told me historically. And I think this is a big contributor to your health that no one has talked to you about, and we need to investigate that further. When you told me that, I looked at the questionnaire and I expected to see this category out of the way, and it was. I expected to look at your blood work and see some of these skewing in the wrong direction, and they were. You don't have, you have adrenal gland concerns, your gut's probably messed up. We need to do testing for that. We do some genetic testing. I do want to get you on a detox. That's my metabolic approach. My neurological testing includes doing brain exercises, doing infrared technologies to help release toxins, doing the machine I showed you, the homeopathic procedures, everything I do. Here's how much insurance covers, here's how much the difference is. I have a 3, 6, 9-month plan. I recommend the 9-month because we got some issues. Here's how much that costs. If it doesn't work, then maybe we do the 6 months. If the 6 months doesn't work, sometimes I won't recommend the 9-month because you're not neurologically messed up, and sometimes I will recommend the 9-month. If that works with you, great. If it doesn't, then let's do the next best option, the next best recommendation. Sometimes the next best recommendation comes down to all the way down here where it's only we're going to do a 6-week detox. Or only we're going to do a sensitivity test for different foods. Or only we're going to do an adrenal saliva test.
But would it be on a weekly basis, the visits?
It depends again. So yeah, it depends again. So it depends where we elect to go. With my 3-month program, it's usually once a week type of protocol.
Okay. And
So
for about an hour?
depends again. It could be, yeah, it depends. It can, yeah.
I'm very busy.
No,
so I'm
it
trying to
depends.
figure
You
out-
know what? It's a great question because you need to know. It could be an hour, it could be 2 hours. But what I tell patients with my infrared technology, because it's a big time drainer, come in on a day that we don't have a scheduled appointment, and that doesn't count as one of your appointments. You're just coming in here. So that's that. Any other questions with that? No?
How late are you here for those of us that work?
Yeah, I'm here till 7 on Tuesdays and 6:30 on Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So and then 1 o'clock on Fridays. And
You go play golf? No, I'm just
no, I don't golf. I have twins. I don't golf.
That's how old?
I'm a chauffeur.
13.
Yeah, 13. So they're like soccer players. They're not they're boy-girl twins. So one's in like Pinecrest and the other one's in Palm Beach Gardens.
Oh my God.
That's crazy. Actually, you got a game in Fort Myers on Saturday, and they have to be there at 9:30 on Saturday in the morning. So, yeah, so it's crazy.
Well,
Yeah.
I teach 7th graders, so.
Oh yeah,
Me too.
yeah. So I'm not going Friday. No. So yeah, so I always tell patients, think about how, the information is good and you may feel good about it, but if you don't really do it with me, do it with someone. It makes sense to you and you get information and you don't do anything, it's like you don't have the information. It's like you didn't do anything with it. So if it at least resonates with you, then and you're really suffering, and you're not just kicking the tires and you're doing some, sign up. You'll get information from $75. It's worth it.
Does your blood test and all
It's a great question. Whatever you got. Usually part of my package deal is blood work anyways, and so I don't want you to waste time. Bring in what you got because we're going to make recommendations anyways for new ones. And really think about not if it's affecting you, if it's affecting your spouse and your loved ones. Sometimes that's more motivating than how it's affecting you. So that's really all I got for tonight. If there's any questions, I can answer them now. If not, please, everyone sign up. I want to help you all, and I can tell you if I can. And hopefully you found it informative tonight. Yeah.
Upper brain fatigue cause, that's all that's me.
Yeah.
Okay, and I know I need to make changes, but then I've got the other stubborn part where I'm a really picky person as far as eating and, likes and
Right.
taste and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
when I come across areas where it says you can do things with diet, I end up having a problem because there's a whole lot of stuff that's really good for me that I
That you don't like.
right. So that's a
It's
twist that
there's
I
some
have to,
challenges.
right.
Yeah, so I have crazy analogies, as you know already, right? So my analogy to that is Steve Jobs. He wore a turtleneck, and he could afford everything he wanted to wear. You find your turtleneck. We find your stuff that you can deviate maybe from here to here, but it's not huge. And so you find what it is that fits that, and that is in your reaction-free area, and run with it. And then make the implement, it's not like, oh, that doesn't work, you have to do it this way. But once you get the test back and you see which foods you aren't reacting to, the less foods that you react to, the more you have different turtlenecks,
Right, okay.
right?
Okay.
Yeah.
You might want to suggest an HSA. Do you accept that?
Yes, we do that, yeah.
I have insurance,
Yeah,
but the HSAs are tax deductible.
What are HSAs?
Health savings account.
Oh, okay.
yeah,
And there's a certain amount of money per year, depending upon what you make,
Yeah.
I guess, that you can contribute toward that, and you can pay for some.
I'll tell you what, just as an aside, I think insurance is such a scam. Like I spend over almost $1,000 for four people, and I hardly ever use it. And so here's an example. I mean, this isn't really part of the presentation, but this is an example. I have a friend of mine, he owns an MRI company, and so I always ask him, hey Dion, what's my cash rate? He'll say $250, right? So I'll get a buddy of mine, it's more, it's 500. So you pay $1,000 for the luxury of paying 500. And that's with almost every service nowadays. If you come out of pocket and pay the cash time of service discount rate, you're going to save more money than had you paid $900 each month for 12 months. What I do suggest though is like a rider, like a high deductible catastrophic rider, God forbid if anything happened, that you have, the first $25,000 you meet. But then it depends. If you go to the doctor a lot, you need prescriptions. I mean, we hardly ever go. I mean, I'm kind of the weirdo health guy, No, I'm not that young, yeah. Yeah.
It's all relative. For those of us that are teachers, I couldn't find you on the United list.
Yeah, I'm not on the United. I'm not on United anymore. I was, and then when they gave me $15 a visit, I said I'm no longer on United anymore.
Okay, so therefore we can't use any insurance.
No. Well,
Coventry?
what I'll do is you set up the appointment, talk to, you don't, $75 is really, if you're not going to sign up, I do think you're probably not sick enough, that's fine. But what we do is we will run your insurance, find out what kind of out-of-network benefits you have if it's a PPO. And nowadays, out-of-network benefits are so non-existent. $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 deductibles. So sometimes we'll meet one, it's November, some of that deductible has already been met, and there may only be a couple $100 left. What I do is I bill the services that are allowable, which I'm kind of creatively billing because I'm coming up with just my rehab codes. Even though I'm doing brain exercises and I'm doing oxygen therapies, it's like I'm doing like an unlisted code, you know? And then whatever I get back, I give it back to you. And that offsets what out of pocket you have. I just hate that it's come to this, but that's what it's come to.
That's what, yeah.
That's what it's come to. Any other questions?
How much is an oxygen thing for home?
You mean the infrared or an oxygen concentrator?
Yes.
An oxygen concentrator, I think you can go on eBay, and actually Sydney's the one to talk to, and it's like $223.
Okay.
Yeah, it's $250? $250 max. Yeah, and that's great. You know, just oxygen, and get like a little pedometer, like a little upper body ergometer, and do exercises for a half an hour, 20 minutes with oxygen. Yeah, with the cannula. Yeah, I put people on my decompression table with oxygen. They do brain exercises with oxygen. They go in the infrared tent with oxygen. I mean, oxygen, oxygen, oxygen. It's really good. Even, I mean, I got a 90-year-old guy in here the other day. He'll do great with oxygen. You know, he's anemic and he has no red blood cells. And yeah, oxygen. You should get your own concentrator. Talk to Sydney. Any other questions? And
with COPD, they'll give it.
yeah, they'll
Yeah,
pay
they'll
for
pay
yeah,
for
yeah.
But I mean, I'm not up to that yet, and hopefully I don't.
Well, it's never hurtful. You can just get it and it'll be helpful. I mean, if you get past the stigma, no one's watching you at home, and you're just using it, and it's good, you know. Yeah. Any other questions? No? All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you do sign up, and I look forward to trying to help you along the way. Thanks, guys.